To answer the question of the thumbnail, yeah, I'd say it holds up, but it depends on what kind of show you're looking for. Anyway, let's get on with the show. Bakugan, remember those? If you don't, there's those toys you roll on the table and they turn into monsters. It had an anime too, which I'm sure from people from the late 2000s remember fondly. I never watched the anime myself, but I had a few of the Bakugan toys themselves when they were new. The anime was a joint Japanese-Canadian production with TMS Entertainment animating the show, and Nelvana handling the international side with the dub. It aired back in April 2007 in Japan, July 2007 in Canada, and in February 2008 in the US on Cartoon Network. Yeah, that was almost 20 years ago. Where has time gone? To give a little background on the Bakugan toys, they were developed as an evolution of marble toys to give them life in the modern day, at the time, and the anime was used as an ad to sell the toys. Oh, by the way, I'm reviewing the Japanese original and not the English dub. I will mention some changes the dub did, but for the most part, it's similar in terms of the script, in terms of the story, but they made changes I'm really not a fan of. In general, the tone of the Japanese original is just more serious, while the dub added more jokes and generally changed the script at times to be more Saturday morning cartoon-esque, when the Japanese original was more so like a proper anime. The story starts with one day, random cards fall out of the sky, and the children of the world are instantly interested in. As a side note, the adults don't care about the cards at all because they find it boring and they don't see any value in it because they think it's just a game. But after that little intro, we cut to our main protagonist, Dan Kuso, which Dan is the nickname he calls himself, as his real name is Danma. As his mom is doing yoga, and Dan heads out to the park to battle. He's good enough at the game to where people at the park are no challenge to him. He's approached by Shuji, Akira's older brother, as Dan beats up Akira on the regular. Shuji then reveals himself as a Subterra brawler, and Dan has no idea who he is, as he used that to mock him. Oh, by the way, in the dub, he doesn't know what Subterra is, despite the fact he helped make the game. Yeah, a little weird dub issue. Dan and Shuji start the brawl, and the rules are simple. Take 3 gate cards by beating other Bakugan and win the match. I actually appreciate this simplicity since it gives the battle a more strategic take instead of higher number wins, even if it does boil down to that sometimes. Looking at you, Dan. So Dan wins and humiliates Shuji, and he ain't having any of that, so he wanted the rematch. During their battle, Drago and Naga are fighting since Naga is trying to take the silent core to get the power for himself, and Dan has a vision of them fighting, and Drago comes to Dan, uniting the duo. We're then introduced to Masquerade, who Runo is telling the other brawlers that this Masquerade guy took her Bakugan away. We'll know later he sends Bakugan someplace called the Death Dimension, or the Doom Dimension in the English dub. Dan then challenges Masquerade in a battle, and he uses a death card at the start of the battle. Dan, despite his best efforts, loses 2 of his Bakugan in the battle since the death card takes effect whenever a Bakugan loses a battle, and they get sent to the aforementioned Death Dimension. The battle ends in a draw since Drago overloads since the ability Dan used was too strong for him. I like Masquerade as a villain since he's intentionally played up to be mysterious from his demeanor to how his voice is intentionally quiet and just plain creepy to really emphasize his presence as a threat. Also, the fact he sends Bakugan to the Death Dimension, that it's not like, oh, they got defeated or fainted like in Pokemon. Like, no, they straight up just, they're gone. And I really liked that about a Masquerade. Masquerade gives another brawler a death card, marking the start of Masquerade giving other brawlers death cards to do his bidding, and Dan and Drago fight him, although they disagree on strategy since Dan just sees Bakugan as a game, and Drago sees his allies getting killed by the Death Dimension. At the end of the brawl, despite Dan winning, Dan throws Drago into the river due to their disagreements. Dan then realizes his mistake in throwing Drago in the river, and they reunite stronger than ever, and their bond solidified. I think this is comparable to, say, Ash and Pikachu for Pokemon, or Takato and Guilmon for Digimon Tamers, as they're not in sync at first, but they eventually learn to be partners and work together. Despite Dan's hot-headedness, I really like this exchange, as it shows they're not all buddy-buddy right away, and it gives some believability to the relationship and gives a moment for Dan to grow. The plot continues on with Masquerade using his powers to manipulate brawlers, with using his death cards to fight Dan and the gang. And while I won't show every episode since the plot structure is the same for the most part, I'll just give the Cliff Notes version. So Runo beats a brawler Masquerade sent with their Bakugan Tigress, showing her Bakugan off. Yeah, that's literally all I'm gonna say. Then the gang meets Marucho, his real name being Choji, in person since he wanted to meet Dan in real life. Yes, really. And he finds a Bakugan Predator, stealing some of his mom's jewelry, and he takes that as his own, since he's the water brawler after all. I'll say that Predator is hilarious. He's a literal tokusatsu character, pulling stuff like the Hurricane transformation and doing rider kicks like it's Kamen Rider. A bit later on in the plot, it expands to introduce the conflict of Destroy that was briefly shown in the first episode with the fight with Drago and Naga we saw in the vision. Naga's trying to take the Silent Core, has broken the balance of Destroy and released negative energy in the Bakugan, making them go rogue. Naga was able to get to the center of Destroy through the help of a human. How intriguing. The goal now is to get both the Silent Infinity Core to restore Vestroya to its former glory and stop Naga from taking over Vestroya. While each brawler gets their own episode to shine, I will absolutely have to highlight Shun's arc, since in my opinion it's one of the high points in this show. Plus the other brawlers episodes don't add much to their characters, maybe except Julie getting Golem and introducing her friend Billy, which will be relevant later. Oh yeah, by the way, he sounds like Terry Bogard.
Okay, baby!
But as of now, they're nothing of note yet, because they're relevant later. Anyways, I nearly cried watching the next few episodes in this show, and I really want to do this part justice. Shun, as we saw at the beginning of the show, is inactive with the other brawlers, despite him helping create the rules of the game. Along with Dan, the other brawlers need Shun to help, since to restore Vestroya, they need a brawler of each element, and they're missing Wind and Dark. Dan wants no part in this, so Bruno and Marucho go off to Shun's place to investigate. When they get there, Shun's house is filled with booby traps and his grandfather attempts to attack them. Bruno and Marucho then find Shun and want him to join on the condition if they win the battle with him, he'll join. Shun actually agrees to this offer after initially denying them when they ask. They battle him and lose, and despite what most kids anime would do and let him join anyway, he sticks to his word and doesn't join the Brawlers.
Before I move on to the next episode, which really impacted me as I said earlier, I just wanted to take a moment to highlight the music of the show, because the Japanese OST for Bakugan is super underrated. Regardless of what I think of the show, I just really wanted to highlight the music since it's genuinely fantastic. So, without a further ado, I'll just play a few tracks that set the mood really well, such as brawl themes or like songs that set a certain mood. Gushing about the music is over, so back to the plot.
Drago asked Dan how Shun used to be number one and why Shun left the Brawlers. The reason is his mom was in the hospital and he frequently leave the voice chat to go tend to his sick mother. We cut to a flashback of when his mom was in the hospital. His grandpa tells Shun that his mother is in critical condition and she won't make it for much longer. Dan and Shun then battle at Shun's request, but in a really clever twist that I really like, is that Shun wanted to battle Dan because battling stops time, as we've seen earlier in the show. Dan then clarifies to Shun that it doesn't actually stop time, it just slows time down heavily. Dan wants to end the battle quickly since he wants Shun to see his mother before she passes. Shun sees through Dan's strategy, but he misses the gate cover he's intending to hit since his tears blurred his vision, and then Dan wins the battle. Dan then stumbles into his dad and they get Shun to the hospital as his mom says her last words and gives him Phoenix, as she intended to give it as a birthday present, since she knew he liked Bakugan and supported him despite not getting his hobby. Great mom, by the way. Just wow. This episode is genuinely fantastic. We got decent character moments with Dan and Shun, and it really humanizes Shun and we really get to understand why he would leave the Brawlers. I really don't want to talk about dub changes that much because that's not what the review is about, but the dub ruined this episode so hard. First, Shun's mom doesn't even die in the dub, which flattens a lot of the impact that this episode could have had, and does have, as you just saw. And the fact that his grandpa's just a boomer that doesn't want his grandson playing Bakugan so he can be a ninja, when in the original he's more serious about the situation at hand and tells Shun to get there. We can clearly see that Bakugan means a lot to Shun since his mother gave it to him and clearly wanted him to be happy. Anyways, I just wanted to rant about that since this episode got me really teary-eyed, and this episode is really good, and I
wish more people could see how it was supposed to be. Predator tells Dan that Runa and Maruchos went to see Shun, and Dan gets angry at the both of them as he didn't want them to see Shun. The three of them go to see Shun, and Dan finds him with Masquerade. Shun and Masquerade team up against Dan in a brawl, and we meet Masquerade's Hydra and discover he's the strongest Bakugan yet. And he would go even as far as to Ridley down be his own Bakugan and send Lucifer to the Death Dimension. I think this has Masquerade's powers. Hydra is shown to be the closest to the ultimate Bakugan in terms of his power. Shun eventually betrays Masquerade and agrees to rejoin the Battle Brawlers and make up with Dan. Alice reveals to the Brawlers that the human that helped Naga was none other than her grandfather. The Brawlers decide to head to Moscow to search her grandfather's lab for clues. They stumble into a video recording from her grandpa that explains how Bakugan entered the human world and how he was involved in that. We then learn her grandfather is none other than Hal G, and that Masquerade is involved somehow. We also see that the top Brawlers are brainwashed by Masquerade for the purpose of serving him, so now we've got plenty of strong opponents to look forward to, while the Brawlers head to Julie's hometown to look for clues in Bakugan Valley.
The Brawlers then look for clues in a cave nearby and find an entrance to destroy it. While looking for more clues in a nearby valley, which Shun lies to the Brawlers, by the way, to throw off the enemy, Shun gives the possibility that someone could be spying on them due to the fact Masquerade's goons know where they are at all times. Shun gives the possibility it's Webmaster Joe, the person who runs their website. The Brawlers are then stopped by Chan Li, and while I won't talk much about the brawl itself, I wanted to mention at this point Drago's ball is getting hot, and he's increasing his power level on his own, which is a sign that he might evolve soon. Of course, Dan wins because of the power of Drago and an epic DBZ moment. We're then introduced to Klaus, who totally wants to scalp Predator for money on eBay since he has an entire collection of Bakugan on his wall. We cut back to the Brawlers where Predator can cook some good takoyaki. No, Julie, they're not Japanese hamburgers. Later that night, Dan suggests that they ask for information about the Infinity Core on their website, and they eventually agree despite some disagreement given that they're being stalked anyway. Klaus then answers the message and the Brawlers fly over to Germany to see him. Of course, this is a giant lie, since he just wanted to scout Marucho's Predator, of course. Marucho then battles him since he wants to fight. The battle ends with Predator getting taken away from Marucho and Runo following Klaus through a portal of some kind. Marucho and Runo awaken at another similar looking castle, but it's definitely not the same castle as they were in before. They find that they're in Masquerade's lair, and find that Masquerade is trying to find the strongest Bakugan to aid in his evil schemes. That Bakugan is Hydra as previously shown. Drago explains that if whatever the ultimate Bakugan is fuses with the Infinity Core, it can spell the end of Vestroya. A rematch with Billy ensues. Jolie tries to snap him out of Masquerade's control, and she eventually does with the toy horse Billy gave her as a child, leading Billy to take out the death card right before Golem would have met an untimely end. Yeah, I actually like this scene. It shows more of a relationship with one of our main characters and her friend. I think it's sweet. Also, I want to know how ridiculous Masquerade looks when he teleports, though. He's just trying to use an escape rope for Pokemon. Marucho, Dan, and Bruno are challenged to a Bakugan brawl against Klaus, Chan, and Julio. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention him since his and Komba's episodes were kind of irrelevant. Since Klaus is an eBay scalper, of course he uses Predator against the Brawlers knowing it'll rile him up, especially Marucho. They eventually snap Predator out of it and he gets them back. Oh, by the way, he never went to the Doom Dimension. The dub kinda messed that one up. Predator is back on the Brawler side and brings the battle back in their favor until their opponents turn the tables once again by using the Quartet battle card to get Drago onto the same gate card as their three Bakugan. But with the power of anime, I mean Marucho and Runo's ability cards and the fact that Drago finally evolves a Meteor Dragonoid. And with that, they were able to win the 3v3. After the brawl, Chan tells the gang that Joe was in the hospital, so they set out to find him to ask about Masquerade. Alright, so I actually really like the next episode as it's more grounded than the usual fare, but the show tends to shine with character moments when they take their time to let the show breathe. Joe, despite his website duties for the Brawlers, never actually played Bakugan due to having an incurable illness. That's two characters in this show, by the way, and that disallows him from doing anything strenuous, such as Bakugan brawling. Dan and Joe battle, and Joe eventually collapses on the floor due to said illness. He's taken to emergency care where he's lying asleep in bed, as he might not make it. Why is this the second character with this plot? Thankfully, he doesn't die to his illness due to a Bakugan named Wyvern appearing in his dreams, and using the positive energy of the Infinity Core, he's cured of his illness. He tells the gang that Wyvern is the one that has the Infinity Core and how Naga can't get his hands on it or the world will be destroyed. And he was never on Masquerade's side as he warned everyone about him beforehand. Later, Masquerade takes out all the top Brawlers that we spent the last 5 to 10 episodes seeing and fighting, proving that he's not to be trifled with. Yeah, I just wanted to comment the reason I went all summary style for those episodes is nothing really goes on, minus a couple character moments and like build up with Masquerade and everything. Point is, this series of scenes are a testament to how powerful he and his Hydra actually are to the point where it evolves. Again, I do wish the build-up took a little less time since the pacing really starts to drag But I think it works for Masquerade as a villain. Dan and Masquerade eventually battle each other as the final showdown of sorts, and Dan loses, losing Drago. But not before he himself jumps into the Death Dimension portal with them, thus seemingly dying himself. The episode ends on a really fantastic scene of his friends grieving his loss and a gut punch of his mom cooking his favorite dinner while unbeknownst to her, her son is dead. Dang, this show's actually getting pretty good now. His mom wonders where Dan went after the events of the night before, and they really give you a gut punch with all the flashbacks they use, and she confronts Runo about it, leading her telling, but not really telling her about Bakugan being more than a game. She asks why he talks about that game all the time, and why he's talking to his Bakugan in the tub. Why are you peeking at your son taking a bath? Anyways, the Brawlers then follow him in by intentionally losing the Masquerade to get to the Death Dimension. They are then faced by the legendary warriors, and they'll offer them a way back home if they pass their trials, one for each Brawler. I actually really like this string of episodes as it gives a little more depth to the Brawlers by having them face a hardship from their past. Special mention has to go to Julie's and Shun's, as they are my favorite, as Julie wants to prove herself that she's better at something than her sister Daisy. The entire thing is a laugh track and clapping sounds, since that's how she sees herself in her head, and it relates later to the episode when she flubbed their play since she tripped and stumbled, yet the audience liked it for being a comedy of Romeo and Juliet. In the end, Julie learned to love herself, given that her sister always did support her despite her not being as good at her at things. I like Shun's trial of him facing his mom as a child, and this one got me. Given how I raved about the previous Shun arc, that's not surprising. Shun decides to move on from his mom's death by realizing he's not stuck in the past and that he should accept what reality is. Shun really is the best character in this show. Oh, and Marucho plays Persona 4 with himself, and Predator poops out his brother. No, I'm not kidding. So Runo is a thing for Dan, which the dub removed. Didn't find anything to note about their episodes beyond their Bakugan evolving, so moving on. Dan's trial is him battling Fafnir. He leads Dan to his trial grounds through a Mario 64 painting and ends up on the moon. Don't worry, Volna, he'll get you back home. Joe tells Alice he wants to battle to help the Brawlers out, and Wyvern falls out of the sky due to his wish. During Wyvern's fall, Alice collapses onto the ground, and the kid she helped in a filler episode, Tsuyoshi, helps her and brings her to his treehouse. He offers her water, and she says yes. In the interim, Joe is approached by Masquerade since he wants the Infinity Core, and they're gonna fight for it. When Tsuyoshi comes back with Alice's water, she's suddenly gone. Back at the trial, Dan is getting his butt whooped until, with the power of Drago once again, he's able to prevail. However, Drago didn't evolve like all the other Brawlers Bakugan did during their trials. Fafnir then reveals to Dan that his trial isn't quite over yet. He needs to defeat all of his friends in order to truly beat his trial and get Drago to evolve again. Since they passed all their trials despite Dan technically failing, they're able to return to their own world. Meanwhile, Masquerade and Joe battle over the Infinity Core and shows off how powerful Wyvern really is, and he was actually able to beat Masquerade for the first time in this show, despite the fact he's only ever battled Dan the one time. Shows you how powerful Wyvern really is. Dan and his mom have a heart-to-heart with Dan revealing Drago to his mom, and it's a genuine touching moment. Marucho and the others are at his house eating dinner with his family discussing their trip, while Masquerade is planning to go to the Death Dimension to evolve his Hydra after Joe beat him. Joe then reveals to the Brawlers that he beat Masquerade thanks to Wyvern. Drago also tells, but doesn't really tell, the Brawlers that he and Wyvern were in a relationship before the events of the show. A little later, Dan reveals to the others that they didn't technically pass his trial yet, since he has to defeat the others in a battle in order to evolve Drago again. Julie battles Dan first, and with the power of the opening theme, Dan wins the brawl. Dan also beats Marucho as well, but when Dan asks in the battle, he wants Dan to fight him the next day. Bruno is worried about Alice since she's been gone for a while. Drago then leaves Dan to meet with Wyvern, and she gives him the lore dump on her brother Naga. The lore is that they're Bakugan with no element due to mutations, and they're called White Ones. Yes, really. And they're outcast because of it. Because they're outcast, Naga wanted ultimate power to show they're worth something. He then battles Runo and wins once again due to Drago's power. Meanwhile, Masquerade challenges the Dark Legendary Warrior and he fights an illusion of Alice. Before I advance the plot further, I just wanted to talk about Dan as a character since we're getting a string of episodes about him and I didn't know what point to interject at this point. While I don't necessarily hate him as a character, as he does grow out of his more immature behavior slowly, I can absolutely see how he can be insufferable to some people, especially in the first few episodes, and I almost didn't like him honestly, but he started to grow on me. The best comparison I can think of is Luke von Trabre from Tales of the Abyss. He has a similar kind of progression in his character. But what I want to know is when Dan will get a new strategy beyond boosting his power to absurd levels and ignoring his opponent's strategies. The next day, the battle between Dan and Shun begins.
Meanwhile,
Masquerade continues his battle against the legendary runner. He's actually getting beaten pretty badly, showing even he has limits. Dan and Shun's brawl continues. The Dan and Drago are getting their butts kicked, and with Shun's words to never give up and not to let their rivalry end on this defeat, Dan and Drago stand back up, and with the power of the opening theme song and a really cool sequence, Drago wins the battle and he evolves into Ultimate Dragonoid. Masquerade's Hydra evolves from his battle as well, setting the stage for the final showdown of Dan versus Masquerade. Alice returns from wherever she went for the last few episodes, and she's telling Bruno about how sometimes she can't remember things or where she's been. Brawlers are then watching the news, seeing strange things such as Antarctica having warm beaches or the pyramids having geysers coming out of them. This is a result of Vestroya's instability from Naga's doing, as the human world of Vestroya are starting to collapse. This is just the plot of the first Sonic Rush game, but whatever. Joe is then challenged by Masquerade for the ability to grow. Who would have guessed? Then Dan steps in and saying he wants to battle Masquerade since Drago just evolved again and he has the best shot at defeating him once and for all. Dan and Masquerade meet at a Coliseum and they begin the battle. That was pretty cool to watch, honestly. It's got a bunch of DBZ moments. It's a literal Dragon Ball fight. Masquerade and Dan are evenly matched, so they keep ending their battles at a tie since their Bakugan are the same strength. Eventually, Dan wants Masquerade to fight man-to-man without any tricks, as they both throw their Bakugan launchers away for the most clean fight possible. The battle continues without any clear victor, as the arena they're in slowly collapses due to the intense power of their Bakugan, as they're using ability cards far beyond anything we've seen before. Oh, there's a neat little callback where Dan was able to finally use his boosted ultimate back when he and Masquerade first fought. He couldn't use it back then because of Dragon's lack of power, so that's a little nice bit of continuity. Through the power of the second opening theme this time, Drago and Dan are able to prevail and finally defeat Masquerade. Masquerade finally sees how Dan has fought all this time with Bakugan and the thrill of it through their battle. Dan then asks them to join the team to help the Brawlers defeat Naga. Now what follows is the twist I've been building up to. That isn't so subtle since the show began with the finally happens. Right before Masquerade agrees to help Dan and the others, Masquerade takes off his mask and reveals himself as none other than Alice. I personally have mixed feelings on how they executed this twist. In the beginning, I think they handled it well, with subtle hints such as Alice being more distant and quiet than the other Brawlers, the fact she was never in important battles despite knowing almost everything about Bakugan, and that Masquerade was in Alice's grandfather's lab when the latter turned into Hal G. Those gave the audience enough suspicion of his identity. However, throughout the last few episodes before the twist, they really start giving obvious clues that I pointed out in the review thus far, and it really hurts the impact of the twist in my opinion. I think they could have waited a little longer before dropping obvious hints to the audience. Either way, I'm glad this happened since I think before this Alice is the least interesting of the Brawlers since she'd rarely had any time to shine beyond the one filler episode. Another thing I wanted to mention is the pace of the show really isn't that great. The first 20 or so episodes are kinda mediocre Super Sentai Power Rangers-esque plots, where it's standalone fights with some character moments, episode 12 being a standout as I've mentioned before. But when the show gets to the Death Dimension arc, things really start to pick up and the seeds they planted throughout the start of the show finally blossom. The first episode isn't really the best hook as it just shows like the Bakugan and vaguely shows the main conflict with Naga. Not a bad episode at all, but it could be a better hook. A great example of an anime hook is Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. That show introduced the main cities of Seto and Neo Domino City, who Jack and Yusei are, and even has a duel to give that Yu-Gi-Oh! Action for those who came for it. Man, 5Ds is such a great show, and I can't wait to tell you all why. Since I'm ranting, and I didn't speak on this until now, but while I'm talking about things I'm mixed on, the animation is another thing. Like TMS's Entertainment's earlier Sonic X, this show is riddled with off-model shots and often weird-looking faces. The animation of this show does drastically improve throughout, but it's something I wanted to note since I haven't mentioned it yet, and I didn't know a better spot to mention it since we just had a string of intense fight scene episodes. There are scenes that look great and others that look interesting to say the least. It's not a huge distraction most of the time, unlike Sonic X, and I feel it's on the level of other kids' anime such as the Mega Man Star Force anime or Beyblade for a more apt comparison. Anyway, get back from the little rant right after the battle, a hologram with LG appears in the Coliseum. He explains what the deal is with Alice's and his own split personality born from the Silent Core's negative energy after Naga's whole scheme. This phenomenon is called the Super Dimensional Nova, and we get callbacks to when the Brawlers search Alice's grandfather's lab in Moscow. After Alice realizes she really is Masquerade, she leaves the Brawlers due to her feeling guilty for what she did as Masquerade. Later, Dan's mom believes this isn't a problem the Brawlers can handle on their own, and she reveals to the other parents what the deal is, and surprisingly they're on board with it. Yes, even Shun's boomer grandpa. The news report shows a giant hole, which is a portal to Vestroya, by the way, in the Pacific Ocean, and which appeared after Naga's power sank a cruise ship. Yeah, I guess they recreated the Pokemon XD intro with this one then. The Brawlers then wish their families goodbye as they Wii Sports Resort skydive into the hole. In the interim, Alice is suffering from PTSD from what she did as Masquerade, as she feels immense guilt from the Bakugan she killed as her split personality. She doesn't want anything to do with her Bakugan, as that triggers her PTSD. She then battles Klaus, and he makes her realize that because all the 6 attributes are equally as important, that reminds her she's just as important to the Brawlers as everyone else is. Finally, the Brawlers land in Woohoo Island, Vestroya, and they arrive in an icy wasteland. This isn't normal for Vestroya, however, as this is a fusion of water and wind, as this is a side effect of the 2 worlds starting to collide. 2 of Naga's henchmen, Locke and Sirtis, stop the Brawlers from proceeding further into Vestroya. Also, Sirtis is just a fish boss from Majora's Mask. Then they fight. And he changed to the battling mechanics, and since they're in Vestroya now, they don't need to throw their Bakugan onto the gate card. During the fight, Marucho gets turned into a popsicle, so Shun has to free him since the others already went through the portal, with Shun and Phoenix's help to get them further into Vestroya since it was closing. The remaining Brawlers arrive in the Open Light World, which honestly nothing of note happens here. It's just a goofy race where everyone sips for Dan, even both as world's gatekeepers. Man, he's super oblivious to that fact. Moving on. Dan then lands in a world of fire and darkness. The gatekeepers of this world show up and start beating Dan and Drago pretty badly. Just as it looks like they're about to be beaten, the great sage Lao Hu saves them. He explains to them that Vestroya was once an estate known as the Wonder Revolution, which was before the attributes were split off, and the White Ones were effectively trapped in between attributes. Every Bakugan lived in harmony. The only way to get Vestroya back to that state is to reunite the Infinity and Silent Core as they split some time ago. Dan and Drago are still getting whooped pretty badly, so Dan wishes he were here. Alice then asks for Klaus's help to get to Vestroya to help out the others, since she heard Dan's pleas for Masquerade from within herself. She then skydives into the hole from Klaus's plane, transforming back into Masquerade to help them out. Masquerade then saves Dan in the nick of time, and the both of them actually come with a plan. Wow, that's new for you, Dan. Great job! The battle rages on, and despite initially seeming like the plan failed, Masquerade snipes them, and Drago finishes the other one off. This is not only a really cool fight scene. I always love when a former villain and main character team up. After they defeat them, for now anyway, Dan asks Masquerade again to join the Brawlers as he gives the same answer of a farewell. Alice, inside of her head, finally accepts Masquerade, and he turns her powers to her and disappears from her subconscious, so she can finally fight his own brawler with Hydra. The other Brawlers then catch up to Dan and Alice, and with that, the team is finally assembled. The Brawlers then all journey to the center of Vestroya to confront Naga. I just wanted to take a minute before we go to the final showdown to compliment the monster designs of the show. I think they're really well done. I think they have a wide range of cool, cute, elegant designs that suit the show really well. I just wanted to mention that because I didn't so far, and I really wanted to mention another positive with the show that I really liked and just didn't find another spot to mention it. Alright.
Let's go!
Okie dokie.
Let's wrap this up. Dan and the others realized going to the center of Vestroya was a trap set up by Naga all along to stall as he sent hordes of Bakugan all around the world. They then returned to the final showdown. Well, that was honestly the best part of the show in my opinion. Great animated fight scenes and a really climactic way to end the main conflict off with everyone we've met along the way helping. Shun's episode, of course, was a standout for me, as they show how cool his ninja skills are. And one last callback to episode 12, which hits really hard since it further contextualizes why he wouldn't brawl initially. In the final showdown, Drago evolves once again into Infinity Dragonoid, merging with the Infinity Core, since he fulfilled Wyvern's dying wish of killing her to get the Infinity Core into his possession. Oh, and the Brawlers all finish off Naga with the, come on, do the honors. And with that, Naga is defeated. Vestroya and Earth are still merging, so Drago merges with both cores and brings Vestroya back to its Wonder Revolution state, and the Bakugan all go back home. Wait, why am I showing an image of new Vestroya on screen? Oh yeah, this is only the first season. They really wrote the finale like it was the end, huh? Maybe some other time. With that, we're done. That finale genuinely surprised me. Lots of great action and real stakes to get me into invest in the characters and world. A little late for that, but I'm glad they at least ended the season on that fantastic note. For my thoughts on the show as a whole, though, I generally enjoyed it, but the pacing in the first half dragging as it did, which in retrospect that was more negative than it really was, and led to summary most of the time in my review, more than I'd like, and the sometimes half-baked character moments where it's well done in the moment itself, but it really doesn't do much overall, with the exceptions of Dan and Shun. Even the writers knew this as they gutted Alice, Julie, and Runo as main characters from New Vestroya onwards. It lowered my enjoyment a bit. I still enjoyed it as a whole, and if I had to give a score, I'd give it a 6 or a 7, which for a toy-ad kids battle shonen is very respectable. I have seen much worse. If you're into goofy shows with some serious fights later on and love cool monsters, you're bound to find something to love here. Unfortunately though, if you're looking for a deep, character-rich story, prepare to be a little disappointed. The reason I say that is other kids' battle shonen anime get this right. My favorite example is Pokemon X and Y, where the characters feel much more believable. Ash and Serena's dynamic feels human in a way that Bakugan struggles with. I don't need every character dynamic to be rich, but more of it is appreciated. I heard New Vestroy is better with it, so I look forward to watching it eventually. And with that, I hope everyone stuck to the end and enjoyed my review. It's my first stab at it, so I'm sorry for any pacing issues or audio pickups with my loud laptop fan on this one. I'm working on another review and it's much better at those things. Those problems have already been resolved. This one was really fun to edit though, and I hope to get the next one out soon. Anyways, see you all in the next review.